So we've got a panel of 4 really great experts here who are going to give us some really interesting insights as to how that can be done. And anyone that's come to Groundswell in the past will know that we've got a history of trying to grow potatoes in a no-till way. And anyone that came here in 2019 would have had a bag of potato crisps made from the no-till potato trial that we did here. So we've had a history of trying to bring a focus onto fresh produce and how that fits in a regenerative system. I'm going to let each speaker introduce themselves, and then if anyone's got any burning questions as we go through the presentations, then please raise your hand and we'll take those questions. But at the end, we'll have 15 minutes where we can open the floor up and have a really interesting debate. So I'm going to hand over to James to start with, who's going to begin the presentations, and I look forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Great, thank you very much, Richard. And yes, good morning, I'm James Young. I'm from McCain Foods, which you may know, of course, from the brand in the supermarket, but a bit wider than that. It is a Canadian family-owned business, started in the 50s, came over to the UK in the 60s. We do sell that brand in the supermarket, but have other customers across food service and fast food as well. Based in Scarborough, and we source our potatoes, so nearly 700,000 tonnes of potatoes every year, going to our factories mainly in Scarborough and near Peterborough, from 200 farmers across the UK. We manage a seed operation in Scotland as well, comes from a further 40 farmers. So we have that direct contact through our field staff with farmers and growers, and therefore the concept of regenerative agriculture and a long-term sustainable supply is really close to our heart. So my first slide actually is that kind of why am I here almost in a way from a big global company like McCain. Not for all of these reasons on here, and again it's to provoke or spark a bit of discussion as well, so we'd love to get some questions as we go through, like Richard said, but there are a number of different topics on here, and some are very true and a good reason why I'm here and others aren't, but we often get called or accused maybe of greenwashing sometimes, companies like us. So, you know, I very much don't believe in that at all, and I think there's some good solid reasons why we are interested in regen ag and soil health in particular as well when it comes to potatoes, which I will come on to again in a few minutes. But the bottom 2 are written twice, not just for a mistake, but you know that is the genuine reason, right up to our CEO in Canada, as to why we put time and effort into this area and into that relationship with our farmers as well, and into looking at improving soil health with our growers, because we genuinely connect it to that long-term sustainable supply of potatoes. You know, that is at risk. You know, we don't underestimate that, and we're doing everything we can through a number of different areas, again, which I'll come back to in a minute. The consumer demand is there for sure, and we'll be doing a bit more work on that with our McCain brand through the course of this year, and talking to consumers about what goes on farm and the good practices that our growers implement. I should have said at the start, by the way, I know they'll introduce themselves, but one of those 200 growers is sat very close to me. We've got a few in the crowd as well, so I'm sure they'll keep me right as I go through these different comments about how we have that relationship with our farmers. The marketing claim is quite key as well. You know, some of the things that our farmers are doing, some of these great stories, they should be shouted about and spoken about with consumers. So that's a big part of this as well. Customers have certain expectations, and I differentiate them from consumers. So some of our big customers, like the big supermarkets, McDonald's, I'll come back to as well. You know, they're our biggest customer globally, and their requests and expectations in this area are huge and growing as well. So there are a few of the reasons why we're interested and spend time and effort on this subject. And then what do I mean by this subject? Sorry. And I put this in as a step back because I mentioned already about long-term sustainability of supply. And this involves a number of different areas as well as soil health. So I'm just trying to put this into context a little bit. So smart and sustainable farming in our definitions does link to soil health, but all these other areas are important to us as well, not least our farmer and our supply chain economic situation as well. So that's up there as well in terms of economic value chain. The innovation of new varieties and new technologies is really integral to this whole approach as well. Food safety, you know, as a brand or any food producer, we need to be very cognizant of this as well. We need to create a high quality product to offer for sale and make sure it's safe to consumers as well. And it's all about the people as well. So you can see as again, as we drill down into soil health, both in my presentation and with these guys as well, we see it in the context of a wider piece of work that we're very much passionate about in terms of ensuring that long-term supply, a sustainable supply of a raw material that people still want to eat. So drilling down a bit, and this is so as you know, and I'm sure it gets discussed in these kind of forums at length over the years, different definitions, but this is how we describe that part of our sustainability approach. And a couple of years ago, some of our team, with some external input across the world actually as well, this isn't just a UK definition, but what do we mean when we talk with growers about sustainable farming, about regenerative agriculture, and about soil health? And that's how we define it, with those 6 pillars. So a lot of the work that we do with growers and the research, development, trials and so on are all anchored back to these 6 pillars. And I should say as well, and I'll finish on that in a few minutes as well, this isn't about us telling this to growers. You know, we're very much listening and taking growers' experience. And again, that's why it's great to be on here with John, because we've been sharing information, his work that you'll hear about in a few minutes. We take on board, we help try and spread that out across our other 200 farmers as well, so that we can make a difference and have a big impact on potato growing in the UK and across the world. If we try and make that a bit more, well, in some cases I get accused of it just perhaps being a little bit too much detail, but we needed to explain what we meant by that sort of higher level view. So, you know, this might be too small to read on the screen in here, and it's freely available on our website, but this is what we showed to growers as what we believe to be the detailed view of potato growing under the heading of regenerative agriculture. And there's different stages in here, you know, knowing that across those 200 growers, everybody's at a slightly different stage on the journey, as it were, to use my corporate colleagues speak. But they're on a journey and everybody's in a different place. So we show that as a progression across this framework. And we do measure where growers are through their input, and we have those discussions about how they can move across towards the right-hand side. So that level of detail is freely available on our website. I keep losing the button, sorry. And we do need to make progress. You know, and Richard kind of alluded to it in some of the previous discussions you've had about potatoes. And it was summed up, I noticed, in the brochure for today, when there's a discussion about vegetables later this afternoon as well. You know, the impact from growing the crop is very different to a lot of other crops that are in growers' rotations. But instead of just sort of hiding from that, we front up against that and still look to make progress. You know, it might not look the same as some of the other plots that you see here today, but certainly we're embarked on and really confident and excited about making progress and growing potatoes differently. So to make that progress, you know, I'm very much about partnerships. So I already talked about the growers that supply us, and there's 240, as I say, including the seed growers, mostly in Scotland. And we've got field staff on the ground who are very much engaged in that relationship with farmers, working both ways. So what we learn from our growers and what we can spread around to other growers as well as coming up with some of the new ideas ourselves. So that partnership approach is really key, direct between growers and our field staff out there on the ground. But there's loads of other partnerships, just a few that I capture here, and obviously, you know, I'm sat next to some today that we'll hear a bit more of the detail about the work that's gone into soil health when it comes to potatoes. But here's just a snapshot of the ones that we're in with at the moment. You know, there's a number of different experts advising us. We're involved, and again with John, and I'm sure when he introduced himself, this Potato Light project that has had a bit of media this year, and the partnership with Grimmy as well is fantastic, and some other customers of potatoes involved in that. So really looking at innovative new cultivation techniques. NIAB and the soil health assessment we're doing across our grower base, cover crops, pollinators, so this is where the kind of financial aspect of this comes in as well. We can't, as a what I would like to think as a leader in the industry, just sit back and not talk about financing this with our growers. So there's some small contributions, if you like, there in terms of soil health assessments, cover crop seed and so on for our growers. And there'll be more to come in that area as well. There's another partnership that's not on here, the customer one I mentioned earlier about McDonald's. You know, I'd call that out as another big kind of corporate brand name, but the work they've done with McCain in contributing and indeed funding some of this work and some of this research and some of this progression through that framework with our farmers is exemplary. And the what next then? So the last bit, I mentioned about the financing. There's still more work to do in that conversation with growers about how this looks, you know, if they're changing those practices. Is it all risk-free? Possibly not, or probably not. So we do have and will have more of those conversations about how the commercial model between a big customer like McCain and the suppliers from farm looks going forward, because I genuinely think that it will look different to how it has done in the past. But we're all ears and very much in discussion with groups of growers to make sure we get that right going forward and keep securing that nearly 700, hopefully more than 700,000 tonnes of potatoes from local UK growers in the future. So on that point, I'll hand over to the rest of the team. I think to Ed first to drill down into a bit more of the detail on soil health. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, James. Morning, everybody. Great to be here to sort of share with you what we're up to over in Shropshire. We'll do a quick intro of who we are. At this point, I'll point out the glaringly obvious, and there's a name missing off this slide. We had a quick run through these last night, and we sort of went, we forgot about Ian. But I sort of got myself out of jail by saying that, of course, he needs no introduction. So that's why he's missing.
Take that.
But yeah, so I'm Ed Brown. I'm an agronomist and head of agroecology at Hutchinson's. So I spend my time consulting and advising growers basically on implementing regenerative systems on all sorts of crops and various parts of the country now as well. Working with the likes of John, who will now introduce himself quickly, and then Ian as well, and we'll move on.
So yes, good morning everybody. John from East Shropshire. We're growing around 400 acres of potatoes for James as a customer and McCain's, and on sort of a sandy loam soil on a 6-year rotation, which includes wheat, oilseed rape and flowers. And we also have a diversified business of Shropshire Petals growing flowers for drying. And we've had a strong interest in sustainable and regenerative farming. We were actually doing a similar gold soil test about 20 years ago, but we didn't realise the importance of them then. And so it's only been the last 2 or 3 years that we've really started to look into it into more detail as such.
Great, thanks everyone. Yeah, I'm Ian Robertson. I'm here as General Manager of Sustainable Soil Management. And we are an independent soil testing business that looks into soil in an awful lot more detail, that allows us to make more structured decisions or informed decisions on what we're doing. And we worked with John for 20 years originally, but we didn't do an awful lot early on, but we've now actually using the gold soil test to really drive the regenerative program forward, which again is what we're going to explain in the next 20 minutes.
Yeah, so hopefully we can sort of draw together the understanding of soils, putting the appropriate agronomy in place with a grower who's forward thinking and wanting to try and to grow potatoes at scale, but in a much more sustainable way. So we've sort of split what we're up to into various categories, and we've started here with catch and cover crops because, I mean, back to basics, they really are a fundamental part of what we're trying to do. I hopefully don't need to explain to this audience at Groundswell the importance of cover crops, but you know, they're delivering so many benefits for us. We're building soil structure on John's lighter sandy soil. Having those root exudates and that contribution of organic matter from cover crops is absolutely vital in terms of building up our organic matter reserves for water retention, structure reasons, multiple benefits that we know are associated with having more organic matter. We've got the opportunity to do that twice in the 6-year rotation. So cover crops are grown before potatoes, and they're also grown before spring sown flowers. And then we usually try and get a catch crop in between oilseed rape and wheat as well. Now, I appreciate this talk is about potatoes, but a huge part of growing that potato crop regeneratively is what happens in the rest of the rotation. So we'll make mention of that sort of as we go along. We're trying to grow as a diverse mix as we can, trying to have as many species in there as is practically possible and affordable to do. So the mix that's there on the screen is kind of where we are now. We've moved away from growing brassicas within our cover crops. We found sort of various issues associated with them, most notably regrowth within the potato crop, particularly if we've grazed them, which we tend to do. They don't all grow back enough to a point where either cultivating or spraying them off deals with it enough so that you're not getting regrowth, and then you have the problem within the potato crop. So we've moved away from brassicas, also partly for slug issues, particularly before spuds. And then where we're using this cover crop before potatoes, we will also include oats. We find spring oats to be really, really good in terms of soil structure. And you can see the picture there of a spring oat plant in the autumn, just what it's doing for us in terms of rooting. We don't tend to use oats before our spring flowers because we're using less tillage before that flower crop. We do tend to see the sort of allelopathic effect of oats affecting the flower crop, so we want to try and avoid that if we can. So really critical part of the system, using our catch and cover crops and part of that sustainable potato crop. And John will now talk to you about cultivations.
So yeah, so definitely a whole farm approach to cultivations. We're trying to use a spade as much as possible and just trying to see what we really need to do instead of doing a blanket operation across the whole farm for different crops. When it comes to the potatoes, we're certainly seeing the benefits of the cover crops, and the soil is definitely more friable than it used to be. So we're now starting to reduce the depth of cultivations, trying to eliminate passes, trying not to plough. So we're using this DTX machine quite a lot now for potatoes instead of the ploughing, and then trying to reduce the depth of the destoner. We've also got some share tines that go on the bottom of the shares on the destoners, which are quite useful to get rid of any pan if there is one there with the destoner. And bed tilling, we're doing a lot less bed tilling than we used to do. So hopefully across the rotation we're doing a lot less passes and trying to help with the soil health. In the top right as well, we're now doing strip tillage. So when we're doing oilseed rape and flowers, we have a horizon strip till machine and a drill then that we're drilling in those strips. And so within the whole rotation, there's a lot less passes than what we used to do. James also mentioned about a potato light project in conjunction with PepsiCo and Grimmy and others. And so that's a 5-year project, and we're just in year 1 of that at the moment. And that's to try and reduce the passes of the planting operation, whether we can do it min-till or no-till, or still with destoning, but with a lesser type of destoner. So still in early stages. Where we are in Shropshire, we do have a lot of stones. That's a picture of a stone row after the destoner has been through. And so stones are an issue for us, and our particular concern is bruising at the point of harvest. So there's still work to be done there, and I think some of our fields we could get away without destoning, but on the whole, I think destoners still have a place to reduce bruising. But I think on the whole farm part of it, we want to or have enough machinery to be able to do passes on the right day in the right conditions, and I think that's a big part of it. Is looking at the soil and making sure those conditions are right before we actually go and do something. So yeah, that's the whole farm.
Clicker's gone AWOL. There we go. Ian.
So when where I fit into the whole team is we talk about nutrient management, and one of the biggest things we're looking at is least disturbance. So whether that's with John doing strip till in the rotation, getting more diversity in, so we're getting less disturbance to biology. And in doing that, what we're aiming to really do is, if you look at the picture up there, we're looking that every soil has what we call a deep freeze. It's got loads of nutrients in it that are complexed. They can be complex with any number of things. And what we're doing when we measure the gold soil test is we're measuring what is in there. And then our plan is to then, rather than apply more nutrients the whole time, is what can we do in the rotation to cycle those nutrients to your crop? And that, the key part there is it's all about management practices. So it could be, as they're doing with strip till, less cultivation, cover crops, different types of cover crops, biological inclusions, etc. And if we can do that, the best thing we can reduce is chemical disturbance, which is excessive fertilizer use. And I think if we look at the next slide, an example of the deep freeze here is that in this soil we've got 1,228 kilos of total phosphorus, and we've only got 85 cycling. So there's a problem with this soil that something's not making it cycle. And with what we're doing with the cover crops, less cultivation, biological inoculants, we're getting a lot more of that phosphate to cycle. And that way we're doing a lot less chemical additives to the soil, which is allowing that soil to become much more native, which again will improve all the nutrient cycling. And the key ones we're looking at, obviously, is nitrogen's a massive input for growing potatoes. And going back to the cover crops and improving capturing nitrogen in our soil profile, which allows us to reduce the amount we're going to apply. We're also using carbon sources with our nitrogen to help balance the carbon to nitrogen ratio, which again will improve the efficiency of it. And we are started to look to move away from ammonium nitrate as our main nitrogen source. And the other elements that we found using the gold soil test that we have plenty of or need to feed differently is calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and potassium. And we use a soil test, and then we're monitoring our growing crops during the growing season with sap analysis to make sure the system that we put together actually works. And if it isn't working, which 90% of the time it does work, we can amend it into the growing crop. And if we take what John's field, we found that we had excessive amounts of phosphate, so we've significantly reduced that phosphate application. You'll see in a minute. And then potassium was having a little bit of an issue. We were overfeeding potassium. That was having a negative effect on soil structure. And that negative effect was collapsing the soil. So by reducing the amount of potash we're using and only feeding the crop requirement rather than what was deemed offtake, we call it feed the need, that's had another effect on soil structure. And the other key elements is calcium and boron, and wherever possible, we've placed them in the ridge, because calcium and boron have to come to the plant on a daily basis. So we've decided that we don't want to sprinkle all through the field. We want to put it in the root zone, so as that plant is drawing water in, it's drawing calcium on a daily, and boron on a daily basis to its growing points. And again, that will help plant health, skin finish, sugar production, etc., and starch production. And to put an example from our nutritional trial last year, the top on the graph there is what our farm standard is, or was. 210 kilos of nitrogen, 80 kilos of phosphorus, and 330 kilos of potassium. On the back of the gold soil test, we changed that to 180 nitrogen, no phosphate, and only 154 kilos of potash. And the reason that was because, again, the soil test said we've got plenty of phosphate in that soil to grow the crop. We've got fairly excessive potassium, so we're only applying potassium to meet peak demand, as in what the plant needs to grow. We've reduced the nitrogen level to the lowest level we thought possible. We're going to may go lower again, but at this moment in time we were playing safe. And then we were doing sap analysis during the growing season to make sure we were okay. And at the end of the year, obviously potato yields were dug, and there was exactly the same yield. However, if you look at the bottom line, there's a £345 a hectare saving. I thought you'd all clap at that point. Whoop, whoop. No. Huge saving. But that's natural saving for us, because what we're doing is making your soil work better for you. We're not impinging on yield, we're enhancing what's doing. And if you look at the nutritional quality of the crop we're growing, again, sap analysis, we find this a really useful way of measuring our crop as it grows to see whether the plant is in harmony with itself and nutrient balanced. And you won't be able to read it from where you are, but if you look at the general, if you blur your eyes, you'll see the soil, the sap on the right-hand side, the SSM side, there's an awful lot more of your numbers or colours are over to the right-hand side. So we've increased the nutritional density of your top growth. Some of the key ones, though, by feeding correctly, we've really increased the sugar content of the shores. That's going to enhance photosynthetic properties. Our potassium is pretty much exactly the same, although we applied half the amount. Ammonium in the plant is being significantly reduced, which again is about plant health and aphids, but our total nitrogen is better. So the amount of nitrogen that's converted to proteins and amino acids is greater, although we applied less. And then lastly at the bottom, again, there is no difference in the amount of phosphate in our plant growth, although we applied no phosphate compared to the control, which would be standard phosphate applications. So at that point, we're quite happy, saying this is looking quite good. We're predicting, again, this is 2022, that we won't have a negative effect on our yield. And we didn't. We improved things.
Thank you, Ian. Yeah, so the next thing we're sort of trying to look at is where possible, try and reduce our pesticide inputs, not just within the potato crop, but across the rotation. We're using all sorts of techniques in our combinable crops to do that. Within the potato crop, in recent years, John's made a huge impact on the amount of nematicides that he's using. It's a no-brainer why we want to reduce the nematicides. If we're trying to build healthy soil and a biologically rich soil, we don't want to be using nematicides where we can. So we've gone from 90% of the potato area treated with nematicides previously to 8% now, and that's come through rigorous testing to work out where we do and don't need to use them. Varieties and the McCain varieties and their resistance traits have been really, really useful and critical for John to be able to manage that and reduce his nematicide use. And then rotation as well, so making sure that we're not coming back too often with potatoes, so we're 1 in 6 or more, to make sure that we're not exacerbating the issue. And for me, I think PCN is a symptom of an unbalanced soil, and a soil that's lacking in diversity on the soil food web. And the diagram there shows what we're trying to aim for when we're building up these species within soil. And actually, if you're repeatedly damaging soil, killing off your beneficial elements of that soil food web, and then putting potato crops in on a regular basis, then it's no surprise that PCN has a chance to thrive, because you're removing all of the things that would naturally predate on that specific crop pest. So what we're trying to do is rebalance that soil food web so that actually PCN is just a very small part of it and never has the chance to thrive. Herbicides, we've looked a little bit at re-ridging trials. The nature of potato growing, herbicides are sort of quite critical, and we don't want that with that weed competition. So we're sort of looking back to older methods like re-ridging to potentially move away from herbicide use. And the final one, fungicides. Now, getting away from that routine prophylactic every 7-day blight spray program is quite difficult, because when it goes wrong, it can go spectacularly wrong. So what we're trying to do is put in the groundwork now to build our healthy soil, to build our healthy plant, manage nutrition in the way that Ian's just described, so that we have a plant that should hopefully be much more robust and resistant to pathogens like blight, for instance. Bringing diversity into the field is another critical element of that, and we've seen in other crops where you can grow different plant species together within the field, it has this uplift of plant health and disease becomes less of an issue. So am I going to stand here and say we've made a big impact on blight fungicides to date? Probably not, but we're very much in that building the foundation phase, so that before too long we will definitely start to try and pull back where we can. Plant diversity is, it's one of the key principles of soil health or regenerative agriculture. For me, I'm not saying it's more important, but it's so critical having plant diversity, not just across the rotation in terms of crops you grow, but within specific crops and within the field and around the field. So, we're going to talk about a couple of examples of where John's fitting diversity in. The first one would be stewardship schemes. So, we've now got wildflower margins around lots of the fields, which are building up our beneficial insect numbers, pollinators, natural predators. We're also then looking at putting in cover crop mixes within the potato fields, so on our headlands and the corners of fields. again, to try and build up the levels of beneficials within the crop and bring that level of diversity to try and help with plant health. And then more recently, we've been looking at companion planting with potatoes, which I know is something a few people have tried now with varying levels of success. We have done peas and beans because for us, well, we're still applying herbicides. Most of the potato herbicides that we use are safe to peas and beans as well. So we can find a sort of a happy balance there where we can let the companions do their thing but still get our weed control. And you can see an example there of those legume roots growing alongside the potato roots, and that to me just feels right. And hopefully we can get some form of nitrogen benefit to the crop as well, which we'll obviously try and monitor as we go.
So this is again, plant diversity, as Ed was just talking about, not necessarily just in potatoes, but I think it's important we look at the whole rotation of the farm. And one of the things that we're just trialling at the moment is, you'll see this picture on the left, which is wheat at 50 centimetre rows, drilled in a wide band of wheat rather than just one row. And then we're going in May, June time, trying to plant clover in between those wheat rows so that we can try and establish a clover living mulch in the 5 years preceding the potato crop. So potatoes are every 6 years, so immediately after potatoes is a winter wheat crop, and then that goes in on 50 centimetre rows, and then the following May, June, we try and put in the clover. That clover will hopefully then be there for the 5 years, going through from wheat to oilseed rape to wheat to flowers to wheat before it goes back to potatoes. And the idea of that clover is to try and obviously help with plant diversity, try and give off some nitrogen to the following crops, trying to give a green cover to the soil, and try and act as a weed suppression almost to some of the crops that we grow. And so eventually, if we can get it working, we're also looking at inter-row mowers to try and mow that clover down at the right times in the spring, and hopefully that will make it then let go of some of its nitrogen nodules and release it to the plants that it's growing next to. And then also with plant diversity, we're also trying a crop of decyst in with the clover as well. You may have heard of decyst, which is helps against PCN. And so if we can try and get a little bit of that growing as well in the wheat crop, that would be a real advantage as well. So all helping towards the potato crop. What we don't know is how the potatoes will look after 5 years of a clover living mulch and how much nitrogen we'd have to put on them. So that will be a trial. But Ian,
it will be reduced. It will be reduced for sure.
And then the last picture on the right there was just a little bit about a living mulch that we've already done. There's a crop there of oilseed rape and buckwheat, and Ed's already proven that I think it was 80 kilograms of nitrogen less on that crop of oilseed rape, and yet the amount of nitrogen in the crop was the same as the standard farm normal standard crop next to it without the clover mulch. So I believe that the clover mulch is a real benefit to our system going forward. And then the last slide, a little Grimmy harvester for you, Ed. Just add that bit in. We're trying to get away, obviously, and it's never easy, but from the picture on the left there was a few years ago, and we've invested in the harvester on the right in 3 or 4 years ago, 2019, and it's really been revolutionary in the size of the wheels on it, and the mess that it makes is considerably less. The bunk on it can hold 7 tons, so we can get the potatoes to the end, and it really is amazing where that can go. So, and again, like I said earlier, it's about equipping us with the right equipment and enough equipment to do things on the right day before we have to make a mess and get forced into a position where we have to go when the conditions are not right. So, so again, that's a big part of it. And then the other bit of that is we also have a sprayer on 36-metre wide booms, but it also has wide tyres on it all year round. We've been able to tramline our potatoes, still grow a row of 2 rows of potatoes under the sprayer, and that's really made a big difference as well in terms of our tramlines and compaction, and it all helps then for the following crop when we're going into wheat or whatever else afterwards. So, yeah.
Okay, I'll sort of try and summarise before we take questions. But I think it's very difficult to sort of, when you get your head around the principles of regenerative agriculture, to understand how potatoes fit. We see it very much as a kind of 3 steps forward and only 2 back scenario if you can get things in place, which means over time you are still making progress with soil health. And they are a really important homegrown food source. And John and others are on soil types that are suitable to growing potatoes, and therefore we should be growing them. But we have a responsibility to try and do it better and have less of an impact. So we can definitely apply the same regenerative principles to potatoes, just like we do any other crop, and hopefully we've sort of given you a flavour of how we're trying to do that at scale. This system is meeting the needs and demands of retailers and also the consumers. So it's something that we need to do, so we've got to keep working on it. And actually, as you've seen, it's making the farm itself more resilient and more profitable at the same time. So there aren't many occasions where you get a win-win, but in this scenario, we seem to be doing so. And overall, we're having that much lower impact on the environment and also on soil health. So hopefully that sort of wraps up what we've tried to get across, and we'll take some questions.
That's great. Well, thank you very much. That's really a good canter through all the things that are possible. And I'd like to open it up to the floor now for questions. So if you could raise your hand and wait for the mic to come to you first. So if we start in the middle with the gentleman halfway down.
Thank you. Question for Ian on the case study that you sort of described around saving the 345 pounds. I was curious about the sort of behind the scenes trials and errors and the impact that had financially, especially on the one hand, and on the other hand, how intensive was the expert supervision required to help the farmer transition?
We'll start with the expert bit. Very little input, in the respect that we did the soil testing and then Ed is walking the crop on a weekly basis. So the program starts with doing some detailed soil testing and then putting a nutritional program in place. And at that point, I walk away, hand it over to these guys on a day-to-day basis. So there was probably an hour's worth of interpretation, something like that, for that trial. The risks involved, or trials beforehand, are quite low. Because again, we believe the numbers we see on the soil test, and we believe the numbers that the guys are doing with the cover cropping, and we're evaluating a lot of the cover crops anyway, so we can see what we're capturing. So far, I'd say we've had very few financial risks when we've been doing these things, because the numbers are good, and we're not taking massive risks. We're just looking at the numbers and saying, on this field we can do that. Other fields it might be less saving. Or in some cases, we're actually doing more. And that's it. It's not all about money coming off.
Right. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? I'd also say that a lot of these trials are all to do with the SAP analysis, and if we can keep doing the SAP analysis, it makes my life a lot easier, because we can trust in those, and so we can afford to take a little bit more risk almost, knowing that if we take the SAP analysis later on, we can then still hopefully make amends. But in terms of time of doing the trial, there's a little bit more work involved, obviously, at planting, of changing fertilizer types and things, and then again at harvest time of doing the sampling of, seeing what was right and wrong. So yeah.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you very much. There's one more question in the middle, and then we'll go to the right at the back.
Thank you, and well done. That's really good to see that you're reducing nutrient inputs. Fantastic. Can I ask, do you put an additional soil microbes into the soil? Are you investing in such?
Yeah, so at the moment on this move away from phosphate, we've understood our soil, we know what we've got in terms of phosphate. We're now gaining confidence, the fact that we don't need to be putting on fertilizer amendments. But what we want to do is not sort of take our foot off the gas completely and get too complacent there. So rather than just go phosphate fertilizer, nothing, we've started to put a product called PC25 in furrow, which is basically a phosphate solubilizing bacteria. So we're kind of taking the view that, well, we know we've got enough phosphate in the ridge, so let's try and put something in there which helps keep it available, make it available to the crop. very much still in a kind of, I mean, we've used a lot more this year than we did last year. We're kind of feeling like it's doing something for us. I'm hoping that we can get to a point where we then have the confidence to step away from that too. But at the moment, that's kind of a little bit of a fallback for us to just feel like we're still doing something to make sure that the crop gets enough phosphate, because it's a critical nutrient. And one thing that gets repeated on this journey of transitioning towards regenerative practices is just you can't just jump off a cliff, and we kind of have a little bit. I think we've done it with good justification, but we do want to make sure that we don't fall into any traps by doing so. So that's kind of the only biological stuff we're doing at the moment. I think John's probably quite keen to start using some compost extracts, because one or two of his neighbours are, and he's getting jealous. So yeah, we'll probably look to have a go at that next season.
Okay, thank you. If we can go to the right at the back.
Thank you. Ian, I'm curious about your use of MOP and whether you'd compare that to SOP.
Thanks, John. We're using MOP rather than SOP at this moment in time, because we're looking at all that was available. Ideally, we'd use like a polyhalite, polysulfate type product, which is slower 80-day or 60-day degradation curve, which would be better. But again, at the moment, there's only so many things we're changing. We're using MOP elsewhere on the farm. So the next stage, as Ed says, we're on the journey. We will do things differently as we go forward. I think we'll probably cut K back further, because what we're seeing is what we're capturing with the cover crops in the rotation. We're actually building organic matter that's holding more K in that sandy soil. So you're quite right to point out that MOP, I'd rather use sulfate or polyhalite polysulfates.
Okay, thank you. If we could go to the front.
Hi, Ed. Thanks for your honesty about blight sprays. You've obviously got a target in mind, I think, where you want to go with that. You did mention the role of varieties in that. So I guess the question is, and to James as well, gene editing, and if there's a place for that as we look to reduce inputs further?
Well, I'll perhaps give James a chance to comment on varieties as well, because he'll have more of an insight on how McCain's are looking at that. I think, yes, it has a role. My view on gene editing, not just in potatoes, across the board, is that I desperately don't want us to get into a position where we're relying on them. I think the trusting in the process of healthy soil, healthy plant, therefore less need for fungicides, is true, and it works because we've proven it on other crops. So I see no reason we can't make that happen on potatoes. But sure, if a variety comes along which can help us on that journey, then we would definitely need to make use of it. But the added complication with potatoes over and above something like wheat is you've got to eat it, and actually the variety has a big bearing on the flavour, the way it processes. So bringing in a gene like that or a trait like that into a potato crop is much harder than it is on other crops that aren't being directly consumed. So.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, variety is very much a massive part of this journey for sure, and and it's great to hear that call out earlier on as well, that the varieties we're using are contributing to this. And again, it's that link to the customer as well. So McDonald's is a great example where they've changed their mindset on approving new varieties for their products to help with this. So it is getting that right balance, exactly as Ed said, about the finished product, but also the agronomic aspects as well. So we've made some real progress, and there's plenty more in the pipeline as well through conventional breeding at the moment. So, you know, we keep a close eye on that technology, and again, you know, it'd be wrong of me to say we don't. I've got innovation on that wheel of sustainability. But again, I'll be honest, the links to the consumer perception with gene editing and everything that comes with that, we're still very cautious of. You know, as a family-owned brand, that is very close to our heart, and we pay very close attention to that, which is why we might be seen as a little bit kind of on the sidelines waiting. But behind the scenes, yeah, we keep very close to that and understand as that technology progresses.
Okay, thank you. Can I just ask James, while you were talking, in terms of customer perception, who's leading the sort of charge? Is it McDonald's coming to you, and what are their targets?
It is McDonald's, and we do see some change over recent years, or even months actually, to be honest, as well. So the retailers are getting a lot closer to this as well, but McDonald's is where we've had, and some of it maybe is because of that partnership over decades we've had with McDonald's. So we're used to that level of collaboration. Their targets keep evolving, shall we say, over time. At the moment, and most recently, it's been about carbon reduction and CO2 reduction. We don't have a McCain net zero target, but McDonald's are very, very much pressurising us on that. So that's still in discussion and debate at the moment. But it does work both ways. So so they're keen to listen to what we think. And again, going back up to that family ownership of the business and what they want to set as targets, the customers are willing to listen and have that debate and discussion. But to answer your question, certainly in a UK world, if you like, then McDonald's are our closest partner on that, and the ones that set those targets with us as well. But carbon would be the first answer, and water efficiency is coming up as well as the water usage is the next clearer target as well.
So if we go to a question here in the...
Hi, thanks. Just one for McCain's, really. So obviously the rotations are quite long on potatoes. So is there thoughts about linking with other partners who are doing regen in between to sort of offer growers other outlets?
Yeah, really. So this is another really interesting area that I didn't mention actually. And yes, again, to try and be concise, that's very much our plan, and we're already doing some of that. But the bit I didn't say is that across those 200 farmers supplying us with the crop for processing, most of them are growing some potatoes on land where they're not in control of the rest of the rotation. So that partnership approach that I mentioned is massively important for that reason, amongst all the others as well. So whether it's other customers or whether it's the approach that our growers have with their landlords as well, whether this is the link to the government policy piece as well, we all need to be moving in the same direction, and we're happy to partner with people who want to do it. Hence the Potato Light call out earlier on, hence our conversations with government as well, and hopefully more of those partnerships. There's another one I was just thinking of then as well, was it's called the Sustainable Markets Initiative, but again, it's where there's other big corporate customers of farmers that have clubbed together to try and work out and understand where the barriers are to this kind of transition we've just been hearing about for the last 40 minutes. So we're pleased to be part of that as well.
Okay, I'll just squeeze in one quick question to Ed. No one really talked about irrigation, and what do you see the potential for reducing the need for irrigation with improved soil health?
Well, I mean, that comes back to the first slide I did on the cover crops and on organic matter. I mean, there's the figure that gets quoted. There's a big range, but there's somewhere between 15 and 25,000 gallons additional water storage for every extra percentage of point of organic matter in the soil. That will have a huge impact on irrigation. Will it eliminate the need for it? Probably not, but it'll certainly reduce the amount we need to use and how often we have to use it, and mean that in drier times, there isn't that sort of panic of having to have huge irrigation capacity and chasing your tail to get round to keep up with it, because actually your soils are capable of storing much more water. And now that we're in this process of less tillage, more residues, more cover crops, we're now seeing physical organic matter in the ridge rather than just sand, which obviously can dry out very quickly, it can cap and then water runs off rather than goes in effectively. We're seeing organic matter in the ridge, which is definitely holding more water. And another one of James's customers, who farms not far away from John, has been doing cover crops for potatoes for years, and he's convinced that his water usage is less for using them. So I think that all comes down to organic matter, definitely.
Okay, great. So if we could go to a question in the middle there.
Hi there. Just interested about your nematicide decrease. It's great to see you've reduced it as much as you have. Where you find you still have to use nematicides, are there any particular ones that you prefer because they fit in with your regenerative sort of principles or not?
Well, I don't think there's any nematicide that fits in with the principles really. But we are, similar with a lot of the regenerative principles. We're not, like Ed said earlier, we're not trying to totally go off the edge of a cliff and fall and, you know, change totally overnight. So we still need some of these chemicals occasionally, and we want to save them for as long as we can and use them where we really need to. So the only one we've used this year is a little bit of nemathorin for PCN control. It was actually on a rented field. But yeah, so we're trying not to use them. And some of the others have gone anyway, so we haven't had much choice across some of them. So, and they're going to go eventually anyway. So yeah, we're trying to prepare for that.
Okay, if I can see hands for any more questions. One over here, please, in the middle. While we're just waiting for the mic, in terms of diesel usage on the farm level, are you seeing a reduction in diesel usage?
It's very difficult at the moment just to justify that, or to clarify it. But there's no question that the cover crops have made the soils more friable. We're definitely bed tilling less, without a doubt, and the destoners are a little bit faster. So I would say on the whole we are definitely seeing less. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, it's a question for James. So I'm from PepsiCo. Great to see the potato light mentioned, and I think that's really important in how we're going to solve some of these regenerative agriculture problems. So that's a project for the future. My question seems there's so many things that have been talked about with regenerative agriculture, especially at a large scale. What's been so far the biggest change and the biggest benefit you've seen in regenerative agriculture?
Wow, that's there's a number of different things, but I think, to be honest, the cover crop uptake has probably been the biggest physically to see. I think over the last few years is probably the first answer to that. But honestly, I would, and not to get too wishy-washy about it, but I would go across to the mindset piece. Honestly, when we have our grower meetings and you hear the different conversation in this area than there would have been 2 or 3 years ago even, that's the biggest change. Honestly, people are keen to do different things. They recognise the connection to that long-term sustainability, and generally, and across our 240 farmers that does vary, as you can imagine, but honestly the shift in mindset in a short space of time has been phenomenal.
Thank you.
Okay, great. And a question right here as well.
Hi, just a quick one. You mentioned a move away from ammonium nitrate. Why is that, and what are you going to be moving towards?
Well, we're moving more to, looking to move more to urea, which everyone may shock horror. But because we've got very sandy soils, we're looking to put urea in there to slow it down and put it into the ridge. And we're finding that then turns to ammonium that will then be held, so not the nitrate part that can leach through, the ammonia will be held on the clay colloids and the humus colloids that we're building up. And then we're looking to a more foliar program to try and feed much more to the need rather than putting a lot of free nitrogen into these sandy soils that will then potentially degrade our organic matter. And I think where we started to see that, we were talking about water earlier on, some of the, pretty consistently on the SAP tests, we're seeing a reduction in EC numbers. So the plant is less salty, therefore it's less thirsty. And that's allowing us to be more confident that we will be able to reduce the amount of water we're using by changing the nutritional program.
Okay, and a question here.
It's good to hear that McDonald's are pressuring you to sort of improve the environmental footprint of the crops. Are they prepared to pay a premium that will translate into a farm gate price?
That got the whoop in the end. We have very open conversations with McDonald's in particular about costs of production. And the short answer, I will say, is yes. Honestly, the open approach to costings that we have, at the moment, over the last 18 months, you can imagine has been a very short-term focus on the change of a cost structure of growing a hectare of potatoes. But the quality of those conversations that we've been able to, and I've no doubt John will call me out if he doesn't think this, but that we've been able to pass on at the farm gate, has been quite something, to be honest, compared to how it might have been 10 years ago or 5 years ago even. So there has been a change. There is more of an expectation of paying for it, but in a realistic way. So some of what we've heard today as well, almost contradicted what I said about extra cost. For me, in those discussions with McDonald's, it's more about risk rather than actual cost, I think, and there's this different approach to risk from crop to crop, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick question to Ian. In terms of nitrogen, how low do you think you can go with potatoes?
I'll look at the guys on my right. How low do you want to go? We will go, I think we'll certainly be down about the 50 to 70 kilos into ridge, or soil applied, let's call it that way. And then we will do sap analysis, biomass evaluation, and then we'll build from there.
Okay, great. Do we have any more questions? One at the front, and then one at the back, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi. Yeah, it was a question, I guess, about how you would get the farmers and the other growers to engage with the programme, the ones who might be more sceptical or hesitant, and how you incentivise them to do that, or is everyone on board?
Yeah, another really, we could go on for all day on this subject, because it does vary absolutely across the board, and I'm intent on not making it a kind of stick approach, because our customers or us, we demand it. That really don't want to get to that, and we're not at that stage at the moment. As I say, that mindset is changing. Our practical approach to that is to try and bring growers together and try and share these. So, like you've heard today, how can we make sure that all of our growers hear that? And have the opportunity to discuss it and kick it around like we've done today, not just us to dictate and present it. So we're intent on doing that, and we are hosting more and more of these smaller events of growers coming to see these differences that have been made on farm and try and filter it through the grower base that way. And ideal, again, the link with PepsiCo and Grimmy and so on, hopefully beyond our own growers that we contract with and into the wider industry as well. So that's our kind of plan at this stage, and hopefully it doesn't become a kind of stick approach to incentivise.
Can I just chip in on that as well? I think as obviously a huge proponent of regenerative farming, if there's a criticism of it so far, it's been theory heavy and potentially evidence light, dare I say. So that's why we're placing a real focus where we can on trialling it, testing it, giving the numbers, so that when we can share experiences with other farmers, it's not just here's what we've done and it feels great. Here's what we've done and it works. It produces a financial saving, it maintains yields, and it has a positive impact on the soil and the environment. So, providing that evidence gives other growers the confidence to then start implementing some of these practices.
Okay, great. So we'll take one last question at the back.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about your carbon tracking. You said that McCain haven't got a target yet for net zero. Are you tracking any carbon emissions on your farms, or are you tracking whether you've implemented any carbon reduction measures so far?
Well, just on our farm, we've done an analysis of the farm carbon toolkit a year ago, and all of what we've talked about today is without doubt reducing that carbon, whether it be cultivations, fertiliser, pesticides. So all of it's aiming towards it, really. So yeah.
And that extends across our grower base. So we do put that data into the Cool Farm tool, and at the moment we're looking at how we extend that further out. You go back to the customer requirements and the Scope 3 in particular. Then we are looking at how we extend that out further and gathering more data.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, that leaves me to thank everyone for coming. Thank you to our 4 speakers. I'm sure they're not rushing off, so if anyone's got any burning questions left they'd like to talk to, I'm sure they'll still be available at the end. And thank you all for coming, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day.